It's been a wild ride the last almost year and a half, has it not? And I'm hoping for you, as it has been for me, it's been an opportunity to step even deeper into my purpose and passion. I've absolutely become lit up with everything that's been unfolding. And when Joyce and Cindy reached out and let's have this conversation, there's a couple different angles we can go with it. And I think actually I want to kind of take it two directions. So we're going to kind of weave in this idea of inspiring positive contribution in the world, to be in the world, to help change the world, that whole theme. And then also navigating your own foodscape. And I'll talk about what I mean with that and how we can develop greater health and a deeper connection to ourselves and the natural world by doing that. As Cindy mentioned, my world is food and nutrition. One of my kind of core purposes, missions, reasons for being here on this earth is to help people find and learn how to craft their own food and medicine. And one of the reasons I say that, I have just been lit up the last almost year and a half now, even to a greater degree of living that purpose, is, I would say, that one of the core fundamental reasons we find ourselves in the situation that we are right now collectively as a society is that we have lost connection with our own food and medicine, for the most part. And I know many of us, I'm certainly on this call, are probably a few more steps further than a lot of people in society, but it is a lifetime journey and we can just keep going deeper and deeper into it. And it's a wonderful, nourishing thing. And we should be able to avoid some of the catastrophes that have come out of the last year and a half. But it's all living, it's all learning, it's all a journey. And yeah, that's the path we're on. I know for me, it started when I was 16, like most of us, raised in a culture, society that has very little food awareness. Whatever goes quick, easy, and tasted good is what that was a-okay with me. That was what guided my choices until they didn't. And the first initial kind of step off that path or down this path that I've been on was I wanted to eat for environmental reasons. And there's a lot of talk about that now. And maybe I'll just introduce a little concept that one of the biggest things that I've been in conflict with the kind of the official narrative is I feel that, health, has been hijacked in the sense that, we've been told, we've been mandated to do all these things for our health, which is a great and noble cause. Obviously, we want to protect other people's health. We want to increase our own health. We want people to live to their fullest, their healthiest. Yet, I would disagree with how we have been going about it. To lock people inside, to isolate them. There's so many, we're not going to go too deep into what has been wrong. I think each and every one of us has had a sense of, this doesn't quite feel right. Like, why are we taking this course of action? And where's the positive and the proactive in terms of really helping people get their health, in order and activated? And that whole narrative has been really, really, really missing. And I'm going to leave that aside, whether that's intentional or not. What it is, it's an opportunity for each of us to take responsibility in our own hands, coming out of a culture where we have very little responsibility, honestly, and we've kind of been raised to kind of place that outside of ourselves. Oh, the government will provide, like they'll, this, that. We've, responsibility of our education, responsibility of so many aspects of our life we have outsourced, and we're beginning to see the result of that. And a little bit of kind of the rumors of what I hear to come is in terms of that kind of hijacking, we've gone from a health narrative. Very soon, it's going to be a environmental narrative, which is already there, but it's beginning to kind of amp up. And so we're moving from the wording of climate change to climate emergency. And I've heard Joe Biden talk about it. I've heard Matt Hancock, health secretary in the UK, talk about this. The idea that there will be climate lockdowns and strict measures to kind of mitigate that. So the Australian government is looking at changing death certificates to allow for climate change as a cause of death, which will only accelerate this kind of sense of emergency. And again, we all want, a good, healthy, clean, whole, sustainable, thriving environment. I think it's just how we go about it. Again, I'm sure myself and many others are going to find a bit of conflict in that. So this is about taking personal responsibility. That's all we can do. We can kind of, point and curse and cuss and swear and, like stomp our feet, but really it comes down to every single individual action that we make and we take. And so for me, that started when I was 16, and it takes a long time. When I first thought, okay, well, I'll just become a vegetarian, right? I'll stop eating meat because that's what we're told, right? And that narrative continues more and more. And what I learned over more than 10 years of being a vegetarian, going from, vegetarian to vegan to raw vegan, and in every kind of nuance and aspect of that, trying to save the world and improve my health, was that is actually only half the story. It's kind of a half truth in the sense that what you hear about it, sure, they can be destructive for the environment, can be, have negative health impacts, is certainly not a very wholesome environment to raise animals, which affects the quality of their life, which can affect the quality of our life. But it doesn't then automatically equal, animal foods are bad. What's more important is how those animals are raised and the system that it comes from. And this idea, I got, food became political for me, right? It's like you hear that we vote with our dollar. Absolutely. Every kind of dollar we spend, we are putting forth our vote, our choice of how we want the world to be. And it's, again, not a plants versus animal narrative. I think it's more the system that it comes from, right? So I think one of the biggest mistakes, maybe wrong turns that we've taken as a society, and this is just kind of the natural curve. I know I go through a lot of this myself, or, one extreme to the other, the kind of the pendulum, and eventually we find that balance, is the industrialization of our food system. And again, not that industrialization is inherently wrong. It has so many benefits, right? In terms of, if we just take food, our access to food, unbelievable. We have, what kings, queens, pharaohs, every person of antiquity would have absolutely dreamt about, right? The access to literally almost any food, any herb you could want, dream of, think of. Not only access, but 365, 24/7, and honestly, quite cheaply in that sense. We can get it. We have an abundance of calories, right? So though there are some parts of the world that really struggle with getting enough food, getting enough calories, our society, we have, too high of calories and too few of nutrients. So in increasing the quantity of food, we have decreased the quality, led by certain factors, motivations, particularly of industry, and this kind of goal to increase the quantity of the food supply. We have ignored the quality of it. But again, we do also have that choice to choose quality, to seek it out, to seek alternative systems and ways of acquiring our food. So that's been part of my mission and my journey. And there's kind of steps and there's layers, right? Maybe someone like myself, raised on kind of junk food, fast food, packaged food, that type of thing. The next step was then getting into, whole foods. Creating things myself from scratch. We all know that homemade cooking tastes better, it feels better, there's more love in it, it's more nourishing. And then from that whole food, you start thinking about the quality of the ingredients. Again, it's not plants or animals, it's the system that it comes from. So, all right, we're not just going to buy regular old, factory farmed chicken. We're going to get it from the farmer. We're going to start going to farmers markets. And each step that we take as we move down that path, we begin to feel better. We begin to develop a deeper connection to our food and begin to nourish our bodies more deeply. And I think, again, one of the reasons, the problems that as a society, as a culture, we face is because we are so disconnected. We've lost that. And the great news is at any point, any time, we can turn it around. The body is self-healing, self-repairing, self-regenerating. We just need to give it the tools. And there's for me, a big element of following our intuition. So Joyce mentioned about, breath. We can do it. We do it all the time, kind of unconsciously. It's that autonomic sense of our body, but we can also do it consciously. To stop, take a moment, tune into our breath. And in our modern world, it's almost the reverse. We can get so caught up in our head, in our kind of busyness and our science, that we don't take that time to stop and deeply reflect, which connects us to our body. And the more that we do that, the more we're going to connect into our feeling sense and our ability to move through the world, led by our feelings, our intuition. Exactly as I said, as soon as, more than a year ago, March, things started to close. I remember it was like the NBA, and then it was this, then it was that. It was like, whoa, like no one had any idea what was going on. We were all very cautious, but for so many people I've talked to, there was always, even at that beginning, it's like this sense of like, something doesn't quite feel right. Like, I don't know why, but there's something, right? There's that intuitive sense that will initially kind of alert you, guide you. And then also it speaks to that element of principles, of values. I think for me, I have a very core principle that how I view government, right? And I view it should be much smaller than it should be much larger. And it was going against that principle of, this could be the most deadly thing. This could be Ebola, like whatever it is. It's still not the government's role to mandate, how individuals should approach and navigate this situation. It needs to come back to personal responsibility. But I get it. A lot of people, myself included, so many years ago, were lost, right? So if you just told me at that time, no, Malcolm, you need to bring more kind of intuitiveness into your life. When it comes to eating, just eat what you feel like. And I was like, well, that's pretty much what I do. Whatever, looks good, tastes good, is quick, is easy. That's what I was doing. So, we can't rely on our intuition alone. And I think the space of the most kind of, enlightened or advanced that we can be is when we can harmonize that head and the heart. And I like to use the analogy of music. And this is where I first really deeply integrated in the principles. We'll talk about with music, and then we'll kind of shift it over to food, nutrition, and hopefully you're going to see how this is playing out in your life as well. So whether you grew up learning music or playing music, maybe it was yourself or someone that you knew, there was, from what I observed, there was kind of two different extremes of musicians and everything in between, where you have someone like my wife who started learning, conservatory, right? Going through the grades, very kind of an intellectual, this is the note A and this is the key and here's the scales, and, playing the Beethoven and kind of moving through that graduation, and could play very wonderful, like beautiful classical music. And then I had other friends, and I was a bit more in this camp where, they couldn't read music. They just kind of sort of figured it out. They had an incredible ear, just like this natural talent, just to kind of, it seemed anything they picked up, they just kind of knew how to play intuitively, instinctually. And as I mentioned, I was a little bit more on this camp. I was a drummer, and it's kind of playing by ear. And we just figured it out just by getting in the basement and kind of jamming things out with friends. And then slowly, I started to try to integrate in that theory of, some of the structure and the composition and what was all this about, and intellectualize a little bit more. And by the time high school finished, I just became completely obsessed with music. I was born and raised in Calgary, and have always felt a bit, disconnected from modern North American culture, lifestyle, especially growing up in suburban Calgary neighborhood, going to school. And, didn't love this idea, this prospect of, you got to go to school to get good grades, to get a good job, to be paid well. It seemed a bit of a life sentence of 9 to 5 that I didn't want to sign up for at all. So my parents were like, well, you got to go to post-secondary. What are you going to study? And all I wanted to do was live, eat, and breathe music. That to me was kind of my connection to what was real in the world and what lit me up. So I started to prepare for that, to go to college, to take my, jamming in the basement and playing at pubs and bars and busking on the street with friends into a more kind of formal context. And really took on that challenge. And over the next 2 years, really dove deep into that purely intellectual side, right? Like learning scales, learning notes, learning the harmony, learning the theory, studying and analyzing and writing music, playing music. And at some point, I was not alone in this sense, this feeling that I'd actually kind of lost my connection to music. It became, is this right or is this wrong, right? And we even had a facilitator come in because it was such a common thread amongst a lot of institutions, music training programs, where a lot of kids will kind of, overthink it. So we had this guy who came in, he just taught us how to play one note, right? Just one note, just play it, feel it, get back into that essence. And from that moment, then it became that journey for me of really just kind of harmonizing the head and the heart. And I began to realize that some of the very best musicians are some of the most technically capable. They play some of the most complex music you've ever heard, sometimes to the point where it actually doesn't even sound like music anymore. If you ever heard free jazz, right? It's like, oh, that's just noise. Well, to the untrained ear, it is. These people, they've mastered the art so much. They know the rules to break the rules, kind of thing. And jazz to me represents this mastery of the technical aspects of music. You can give them the most complex piece of music right off the sheet, jazz, classical, you name it, they can play it. And at the drop of a hat, they can just break out into the most spontaneous, free flow of incredibly beautiful, soul touching music that's spontaneously just unfolding. It's a sum of the greater than the parts. And it's absolutely phenomenal. And so that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to have mastery of both those things. And, after going through college, I kind of took a break. I did some traveling, a lot of meditating to kind of get back into that heart space and really follow my heart. And one of the things I realized is, music had always been this kind of lifelong dream of, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. And once I was doing it, I was like, oh, maybe it's not. And so I gave away everything. I had a giving away party. I gave away my drum kit. I gave away all my CDs that I've been collecting, and just lived out of a backpack for a couple of years and traveled around the world, lived in different ashrams, meditation centers. And through all that, even through college, there was this thread of learning about food and trying to develop myself, because I'm really struggling as a vegetarian. Intellectually, I was reading the books. I was like, okay, this is the most perfect diet. This is how you have to eat, and you got to have this much calories, and it's got to be, balanced proteins and carbs and da 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 da. And at some point, again, that realization, that learning that I had got through music began to shift as that deeper, more intuitive sense began to kind of bubble up within me. It's like, well, Malcolm, maybe what you think you know, you don't know, right? And I was a very hardcore kind of vegetarian. This, I'm right, this is the way to eat, da 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 da. But my body was telling me otherwise, and I had to kind of humble myself and come back to my body and start listening to my body as to get the signs, the signals, the clues of how to navigate forward. And now I'm in a place of kind of harmonizing both those worlds with music, with food, nutrition. A few of us on the call here are into like speaking, the art, the craft of speaking, and it's no different too in terms of learning those technicals. But we've all seen a speaker who's, very technical, and it's, it's like almost mechanical, and it's very dry. And we've also seen someone who just has that ability to just kind of incredibly free flow, just like music, the harmonization of those two, and food and nutrition is the same. So wherever you are on your journey, hopefully you see that playing out in life. And when it comes to food and nutrition, it is about kind of understanding the science and the theory, but it's also about honoring your own body's intuition and wisdom, and deepening that connection, following the golden threads, as one of my herbal mentors would say. So how do we develop that through food and nutrition? How do we reclaim our health and keep going deeper and deeper? And when we do, not only is it good for ourselves, our body, but it's also good for the environment. It's good for communities. It's inherently nourishing on all those levels, and we can just let the dogma go. So if we think about, I mean, people call me a hippie. And I have fun with that term, like the hippie CEO and that kind of thing. And there's been moments in my life where I've kind of like, some people have meant it as an insult, or I've taken it like with a bit of offense. And I remember a friend of mine, she was like, she was really into the Bible. She was studying it in high school, having not been raised that way, just out of her own pure interest. And she's like, you know what? When I read about Jesus, he was like the ultimate original hippie. And what does it mean to be a hippie? I mean, to me, it embodies everything about being natural, right? Which I feel is our highest state. Right? So what's one of the best pieces of advice you could give someone, right? Maybe it was your son or your daughter. They're going out for their first date, or they're giving their first recital, whatever it is. The best bit of advice is, hey, just be you, just be natural. Or perhaps maybe what's one of the best compliments you've ever received? You've just really, a performance of your own, you've really just shined, and someone says, hey, you're a natural. Right? We all have a natural abilities, a certain nature within us. And I feel, to me, I wasn't raised going to church or anything. My parents, there was no term for it. There was no, like, I never even heard the word God until much later in my life, let alone the word atheist. That connection was always through nature. And that's always felt the most authentic, the most real in life, like literal, absolute nature. And the science is catching up with that, right? This idea of forest bathing, how it impacts us on a deep physiological level, right? Our blood pressure begins to lower. We begin to breathe a little bit deeper. We relax when we're in nature. We know how good it feels intuitively, instinctually. So for me, my journey has always been about, how can I like be in that environment, be in that way as much as possible? And I was on a call just yesterday and talking about this idea of, we were talking about medicinal mushrooms, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which are, a product of the forest, right? These kind of noble polypores that live in this ecosystem. I'm really into wild foods because, to me, they capture that essence. It's a way of drinking in the forest. It's an internal forest bathing. If we are what we eat, again, coming back to, it's not the food, but the system that it comes from. The idea of terroir, that every food is imbued and fused with its place, right? In every other aspect, right? Yes, it's the whole debate of nature versus nurture. So, and it's not, in life, it's not either or, it's usually and, right? It's nature and nurture. So what's kind of, when we talk about nature, it's the genetics and the nurture, and it's the epigenetics, it's the environment and all the influence. And I'm sure, one could argue which one is better or has more influence, but it is both, right? So when we talk about wild foods, their nature, they have this unique heirloom genetic, a strength and integrity. If anybody's a gardener, I'm learning this lesson, and I've been paying attention for a number of years. And I'm not saying either one is better or worse, but when you have a garden, a friend of mine, Blaine Andrusic, he's got like a literal jungle, out front of his house that he absolutely does nothing to. Right? He doesn't water it. He doesn't weed it. He doesn't do anything. And it just thrives. And it's like, he's the idol of the neighborhood in terms of his incredible front lawn that's a source of food and medicine. And he's chosen wild plants that have a strength and a resilience and are adapted to this ecosystem versus a lot of us, myself included, right? I struggle with the tomatoes, and I struggle with the lettuce, and I gotta, like, water them and nurture them and protect them, and they require such pampering versus a wild. So in a wild genetic, there's a greater strength and resilience and adaptability versus something that's maybe hybridized, or I would even describe as being, degenerated. Our food systems have been degenerated through the industrialization, through growing from scale, through selecting for traits and qualities that are maybe good on one hand, right? Oh, this tomato's really going to ship. It's not going to bruise. It's got a nice thick skin. It's nice and ruby red. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, it actually doesn't even taste like anything. and where's the nutrients, right? Where's the flavor? So if we can go back to, more wild, authentic genetics, like heirloom, that idea of heirloom seeds. Well, what's an heirloom? An heirloom is like of something so much prize and so much value, you want to pass it down. That's the type of thing that we want to move towards. So when we're sourcing out our own food and medicine, I'm not saying that we should all only be eating wild foods, but we should be incorporating wild foods because of the nature and then the nurture, that environment that they've grown in. And then further down from that, right, somebody who's maybe a farmer that has chosen wild genetics, or closer, more authentic heirloom genetics, and what's the environment that they're providing for that plant, that animal, that bacteria, that fungi, in terms of love and the care of how they've grown it, raised it, traded it, prepared it, and then for you to receive that. It makes a huge difference, and it brings us, I truly believe, and I've seen through more than 15 years of being officially in the business of this, where it has that impact. I mean, one of my probably greatest testimonials actually I've received all over the years of through the work of the Light Cellars. I remember it was this guy. He'd only been shopping at Light Cellar for a few weeks. This is way back in the early days. Somehow it was one of those random occurrences. He, found us, just wasn't really, I don't know, wasn't really on the path of health food, this, that, the next, but ended up in the shop, got intrigued, got turned on, and got fully activated. And at one point he says, Malcolm, he's like, I don't think I can work at my job anymore. Because he had changed so much in terms of his worldview and how he was feeling. He was becoming another person, and many aspects of his old life were no longer serving him in that. So food is a powerful tool of transformation, not only internally, but externally. That idea that we vote with our dollar, no more so than our food dollar. And I think it becomes it's a path to becoming, back to nature, our own true nature, becoming more of who we truly are. And one of the, when you're in business, you talk about having a target market, a niche market. And very early on, I was into food nutrition. My wife was as well, but one of her specialties is she did colonics, which are basically giving people enemas, sticking a tube up their butt and cleaning out their colon. I did a whole stand-up comedy routine of, how we met and that whole journey, tying that through. And I used to joke it was a feed 'em and clean 'em kind of business. And we both had this vision of, and I don't want to sound the wrong way, but we had a vision that who our ideal client was not somebody who was sick. And again, there are many people, and we do attract people who are sick, who come to us for healing food, but our main, and there's lots of people who that is their path. But for us, we wanted to work with people who were, inspired, who were already on the health journey. I'm not the person to take you from McDonald's, to superfoods or wild foods. I'm that person that, you're already shopping at community or your local health food store, and you want that next level, that next edge. And very key, we wanted it to be that thing that made the difference in who you are, in your career, in activating your life's purpose, right? And that, you've found your nature, you're working on it, and it's that nurture, that epigenetics that just like flips the light switch and gives you that edge. And that's who we've always focused on, and that's the viewpoint that I've seen, that food has the power of. And when we can do that, then we're bringing positive contribution to the world in the best and only way that we can. And that's how real change happens and gets created. And I think, the result of the last year and a half is a culture, a society that has lost that way. And as much as I've gotten, upset and frustrated and challenged by it, there's more and more just accepting, everyone's got their own path, their own journey. And it's tough because those of us that are on this path, that are activated and aware to, what is our own food, what is our own medicine, how we want to live our life, is just that conflict of it being imposed upon us. We've been restricted. And that's the challenge I'm still sitting with, but that societal influence. But I feel fully empowered and liberated in my own path and journey, and confident that I'll be okay. My family will be okay. That my community be okay. Yes, there's something out there that people are getting ill from, that is seen as a big threat. But what's most important is living your purpose, eating fresh, whole, nourishing food, good quality water, sunshine, fresh air, negative ions, community, gathering, laughter, love. All those things are what is real and what is important, and holding those values and really embodying that in the world is how we move forward. So I know we only got maybe 5-10 minutes left. We touched upon a lot, and is it just a bit of a stream of consciousness, but if there's anything that anybody wants to kind of pick out or pull out from that, then I would be happy to touch upon some more.
Jackie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question because it's come up in my network, so I'd love Malcolm's take on it. And first of all, I have a son who was a jazz pianist as well, and followed his path and realized couldn't reconcile the head and heart, and but loves that he can play the piano, but is putting himself on a new path and is vegan, and really found through music that he had to find a new path for himself. So it's very similar. So thanks for sharing that. Now I know he's part of a really good group. So
all right,
proud of him. And he's taught me a lot. But here's my question about, you mentioned farmers markets. And so one of the things I've done this last year is really looked at what was important, really started to buy local, be a lot more aware of those kinds of things and not be cost driven. And I'm in a fortunate situation that I have a little bit of disposable income to spend. My son is raised, almost launched, those kinds of things. But a friend of mine felt that the farmers markets weren't any closer to the farmer than Safeway. And I said, well, but they're owning their own space. We are taking out a middleman, I think. And so if I'm going to spend a little bit more, buy smaller quantities, go back to cooking myself as a single person, and I've really enjoyed doing that. But what's your take on that, Malcolm? Because I felt that we were removing a middleman and going straight, and the farmers markets give that space for our local produce and our people who are making good food more locally, right? If you can't buy, then I want to buy from someone who I know their ingredients are, and I'm okay to help them create their job and livelihood. What I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Great observation. Thank you for that comment. So when I went to college, I lived up in Edmonton, and that was really where I started kind of digging down deeper into the food system. I had a roommate that was kind of instrumental. I took me to the bulk food section. He introduced me to farmers markets, and the one in Edmonton, the Strathcona one anyways, they have a rule where you have to make it or grow it yourself. That's it, right? So there's only makers and growers in that market. And then years later, kind of settling back in Calgary, I always had this bias, this judgment of like, yeah, exactly what you said. Like, well, these guys are just importing avocados and, selling them at the farmers market. They're not farmers. And, I've lightened up on that. Exactly what you have shared, which is, I'd rather support this individual. I mean, I love avocados, right? Like, and I'd rather support that individual in, even if they're sourcing it from the exact same place, that, it's an individual business and, versus a big chain or a conglomerate, that type of thing. And amongst those types of, and maybe the Calgary farmers market, I don't know what the percentage is, maybe it's 50-50 or 60-40. Amongst all that, there are stands where they make it, they grow it. And then also too, those smaller businesses that might just be doing the importing, there's also room and influence for them to possibly have more influence in their selection, right? If something unique or different or higher quality comes up, they can choose that versus maybe a big chain. Well, this is what's in the supply chain and then this is all you get. So yeah, thanks for bringing up that distinction.
So with the idea then going to the farmer's market and making it part of your routine, but then looking for the makers and the growers might be another way of, if you want it, I guess maybe they were being a bit purist about it or something, but I still felt that there was a value in going to the local shop owner. So
yeah.
Looking for the makers and the growers might be another way to satisfy that level. Okay.
Yeah, totally. So that's that next step, right? You want to go as close to the source as possible. And it's bringing up this idea of, as much as I'm into, local and wild, like I think it is the way to go. I do hold that kind of balance, that 80-20 perspective, where if we can get the bulk of our calories from, small, local, organic, certified or not, what's more important to me, I know certification can be quite an expensive and very lengthy, detailed process that is simply unattainable for a lot of farmers to go through. So as long as the practice is there, I don't care so much about the certification. And how do you know? Well, if the farmer's there, if the maker, the grower is there, you can ask them. And so it's kind of that 80-20. And then the 20% also to me represents what I like to call like the exotics and the erotics, like I'm into a global cuisine. Like I love mangoes, right? I mean, I'll be sad if our, global food supply chains collapse and we no longer have them. I don't make them, 100% of my diet, just the same as, we all enjoy coffee, we all enjoy tea, we all enjoy spices, we all enjoy like exotic foods and herbs from around the world. And that's a big part of what my store is all about, but it's that 80-20. And if that kind of bulk of your food can be local, especially that's fresh or it has that water content that is really heavy and hard to ship around versus that 20%, which is that kind of potency that's dried, long shelf life, easy to ship. We are kind of global beings in that sense. So I'm certainly not a 100-mile diet. If I'm ever forced to do that through supply chain collapses, like I'll give it my best, but I love that kind of spice of life.
Thanks. That's really, I love the 80-20 rule. That's wonderful because I can't give up avocados either.
No.
Thank you, Jackie. I was wondering with regards your thoughts on illness. So I had a friend saying, oh, like this, like my side hurt or whatever. And I said, oh, perhaps it's a message. It's like, okay, it's right. It's just like, it needs attention. It's like, oh, my arm hurts, or just maybe thoughts with regard to illness and food and just a broader perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, our body is self-healing, self-repairing, self-regenerating, like a highly intelligent, extremely capable organism that, sometimes our conscious mind gets in the way, right? I mean, I almost chuckled when Joyce, you said, like, I haven't been breathing very often lately during your meditation. It's like, I get it, right? Consciously,
deeply, yes.
Yeah, the body is always breathing. It's we're hardwired for self-preservation, growth. The body will do everything to, propel itself forward, maintain health, homeostasis, all that. And when we fall out of balance, our body speaks to us all the time. It gives us signs and signals. We just haven't learn the language, right? So, soreness or aches, pains, all these things are actually literally signs and signals. It's the body speaking to us that we just don't recognize, right? And it can be as obvious as pain. And then you can also get into really kind of finer nuances where a lot of natural practitioners, herbal practitioners have been trained in, which I think once upon a time were a lot more accessible to the average person, but we've begun to lose that knowledge, just as we've lost knowledge on how to prepare foods, but to more deeply read the signs and signals of the body. I had a neighbor just drop off this massively thick book, 1914. She's like, you might really enjoy looking through this book. And it's kind of all these old, like what we call wives' tales or folklore. And, again, not to say that all of that is 100% scientific truth and proof, but there's wisdom in there, right? And especially as it's been refined down and codified in systems like traditional Chinese medicine, and they have, tongue diagnosis, pulse diagnosis, or iridology, reflexology. Your body is this kind of map that if we only just learn to read it, we could really begin to tune in to what's going in the body in a much deeper level. And if we're not there yet personally, I mean, that's the role that a practitioner can play that can really reflect that insight of just like, oh, sore spot here, like that indicates, gallbladder, or we all know like the bags under the eyes, or all these conditions, bumps on the back of the arm. These are all like signs and signals to kind of lesser or greater degrees. And when we ignore those signs of just like the little nudges, the little like, hey, what about this? What about that? Right? Then we begin to more deeply entrench patterns that become more chronic. And then we just kind of drive ourselves downhill. But it's never too late. One of my mentors years and years ago says, there are no incurable diseases. There are only incurable people.
Ouch. Whoa. Okay. I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Jacqueline says, yeah, the body knows.
Are you familiar? You're familiar with Louise Hay's work? Louise Hay's work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That idea that, beyond the physical, that there can be an emotional and a spiritual underlying, cause, message, that type of thing. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Wow. Writing that
Yeah,
one down.
I teach a course, one called Intelligent Eating. So if you really want to go kind of deep into this idea of, harmonizing, balancing the head and the heart, and even figuring out the whole kind of intellectual side, wading through that, because I've been there. I've been studying nutrition for so long and got so deeply lost in it, into the science and in the kind of the heady stuff. To really balance that out, I developed something called the food scope, where this is an acronym for lenses to which you can look at any food, any diet, and know if it's right for you, and just ditch all that dietary dogma. So science is one lens, absolutely. Unfortunately, some people take it to be the only lens, right? I mean, this last year and a half, like, well, trust the science, listen to the science. And there's a lot of issues there. Science in its pureness is incredible and amazing. There's a lot of corruption going on there, a lot of deception. So we also need these other lenses. C is culture, right? We talked about this cultural wisdom, this folklore that a lot of science then ends up proving like, wow, oh my gosh, how did they know, right? These unscientific communities, that there's incredible amount of wisdom there. So culture is another lens that we want to get into. Others and observations, right? Observations of the natural world, of plant worlds, of animal worlds, of our own human communities. We learn through observation. And then in the scope and acronym P and E, personal experience, which is this intuitive aspect. So it's on lightseller.ca. It's a free course I go through. It's about an hour and a half kind of diving through that. And then there's a second part to it I haven't released yet, but it's really gets into the nitty gritty of intuitive eating, right? So from that space of personal experience, how can we eat more intuitively? How does a deer know right? Like supposedly they're not as intelligent, right? Like, how's your dog know? It doesn't have a degree, but it knows what to eat and what not to eat. There's a certain innate intelligence that all life forms have, that you have, that you can absolutely rely on. And again, ultimately, it's not just choosing one or another. It's about developing both faculties of knowing. Cool. Well, looks like 10:59. We're hitting 11 o'clock right on the dot here.
Malcolm, thank you so much. I love when we can end our Sunday session with answers, but also more questions. And so I'm speaking for myself, but I trust I'm speaking for many of you when I say you've given us lots of words of wisdom today and lots of other things to think about.
All right. Wonderful. Hey, well, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to spend the morning with you all.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. And thank you, ladies, for being here this morning. As Cindy mentioned, the summer Sunday morning, do whatever, and we will reconvene in September, but with lots of notice. So we appreciate you. We love you. Thank you so much. And